of Human Resources and Administration at AEI, and it's a fancy way of saying that I get to do all the hiring and firing in the organization. The good news is I do mostly hiring and very little firing. The hiring is the fun part, giving people opportunities. In each semester, I pick a different part of the country, regions of the country, in order to kind of go visit and meet with students, go to a couple of different campuses, enjoy some good food. For some reason, I decided February and Syracuse were just the right mix, and stepped off the plane and immediately regretted that choice. Now, I did my undergraduate work here, alum of, when did I graduate? In '93. So I have some vague recollection of how tough the winters were. DC has made me soft. We got 14 inches of snow and it shut down the city for a week. But at least I know how to drive. That's the one advantage. So you get practice doing that. But anyway, so I go around and just kind of want to talk to students a little bit about AEI, but not just about the American Enterprise Institute, but also just think tanks in general. You know, a little bit in terms of kind of expanding people's perspectives in terms of what think tanks are about and how they're structured and what some of the similarities and differences are. I have a very cheesy video that I'm going to show you about halfway through, and then talk about job opportunities and certainly internship opportunities as well. Just, you know, where your career might fit in with a place like AEI. Come on in. See, told you. There's materials right up front, so grab stuff if you could. And the yellow sheets, by the way, if I can get those back at the end of the session, that'd be awesome. And I'll talk a little bit about it because it allows us to stay in contact with you all too. I forgot my clicker at home, so we'll just do this manually. AEI itself. Right, you can read the little blurb. If you spend any time on the website, you can get our mission statement. You know, obviously we're a think tank. We got all these fancy ways of explaining what we're all about in terms of talking about liberty and increased individual opportunity, strengthening free enterprise, and the like. The reality, we've been in this game for a long period of time. AEI, we're the second oldest ongoing think tank. Brookings Institute is a few years older than us. For us, it started in the late 1930s. I think it was 1938 to be exact, with a handful of business folks in New York City who were interested in what was happening on Wall Street. There were a lot of regulations that were being piped up 95 from DC and were making an impact. And they became more and more concerned. And so they collectively said, you know, well, let's see if we can gather, sit down, and then work on maybe coming together and figuring out some common sense solutions. Now, a number of these business folks were economists by training. They came from the University of Chicago, and that lends itself to helping explain if we have a bias. You know, if you hear about AEI, you know, I oftentimes hear a certain C word used in order to describe where we sit on the political spectrum. Anyone want to guess what the C word is? That's the one, yeah. It's always, there's a running joke in the office that anytime that the New York Times types in the letters AEI, they got a macro set up so it automatically prefaces it with the conservative think tank, AEI. If they do that with Brookings, it's always the preeminent, nonpartisan think tank Brookings. And so they get to be nonpartisan, we get to be conservative. The reality is we're certainly just as nonpartisan as Brookings is. We actively work with both sides of the aisle. We're not looking in order to be a mouthpiece for the Republican Party or just counter the whatever the Democrats have on in the pipeline, but rather we describe ourselves as sitting quite firmly in the industry of ideas. We're a think tank in the very classical, traditional sense that we've got a bunch of scholars who sit around all day long talking, writing, discussing, and if we have a bias, it's absolutely towards free market economics. Now, everyone in this classroom, if you're here, you've taken micro and macro 101, you understand supply and demand and points of efficiency and mathematically how it's been shown that as you start to regulate, it creates additional inefficiencies in the marketplace. And so it's not a big surprise that we're known for that free market approach. It's somehow gotten equated, though, over the years with being more conservative than it is with liberal. And that might be because it's typically kind of the stomping grounds of fiscal conservatives. But the reality is I have employees, scholars, staff on hand who are registered Republicans, Democrats, independents, moderates, self-proclaimed raging moderates. I got to thank Norm Ornstein for that moniker. And a whole host of different ends of the political spectrum, right? It's fair to say that overall, if you probably would map out where all of our scholars sit, they probably sit more right of center on some issues and maybe a little left of center on other issues. It really boils down to the individual. If you drew a little bell curve over it, it probably skews certainly more right than left, but it's very much on that free market approach. The issues that we don't work on, and this is why I always want to ban that C word, that conservative word, is we don't work on issues pertaining to the typical stuff that's associated with social conservatism, right? We don't work on marriage issues, we don't work on babies, we don't work on bedroom issues, we don't work on a whole host of those social type of issues. We work on areas of economics. Going back to the history, 38 founded. It took us 5 years to figure out that policy was apparently made in DC, and it would be smarter if we were actually located there than in New York City. And so since 1943, we've been operating out of practically the same building, a couple of blocks away from the White House. Our biggest growth and expansion area occurred during the 1970s. First 20 years of our existence, economic policy was the only thing that we worked on. We worked in issues of, again, regulatory study, taxation, Social Security, international trade, healthcare, ag, telecom, financial markets, housing, a few others. But it was about in some early time in the early 70s where we expanded into foreign defense policy studies, and then eventually into other areas of domestic non-econ related research. The organization itself, we're basically split into two halves. There's the academic side and then there's the business side. If I'm talking on a college campus, everyone wants to know about the academic side. They want to know about the factory floor, right, where the stuff actually is produced. They tend to care a little less about human resources or working in IT or as an accountant in the organization. And so I'll focus more on the academic side of the organization. We're split into three main departments there. Economic policy study is about 45% of what we do. Already kind of listed and rattled off a whole host of different issues that we worked on. The next largest department, and perhaps the most vocal, I think it's fair to say, would be our foreign defense policy studies area. In there, it's probably about 40% of what we produce. It's very regional focused in nature. We've got scholars, a large number of scholars working on the Middle East. It's kind of tough to have a couple of wars going on in the area and not dedicate a little bit of time working on that. But we also have scholars working on Russia and Asia, defense and security related matters, grand strategy, NGOs, terrorism, and the like. And then the last kind of remainder is what we call our social and political studies, or I call it social and cultural studies. That's the catch-all for everything else that we might do. It's a handful of scholars that work in issues pertaining to education policy, tort reform, welfare study, continuity of government, campaign finance reform, to list but a couple. Demographics would be the other one. So all told, about 70 full-time scholars. which makes us about the same size, I think, in terms of the number of professors that are here at Maxwell. All right. Actually, I think we're actually technically a bit larger, just in terms of the sheer number of faculty on hand. All right. Assisting the scholars, we have about 30, I think right now it's 35 research assistants. So the people that are there in order to support the scholars in a number of different ways. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the rest of the institute is the business side. And like every organization, there's an HR department, there's IT, accounting, but we also have departments that are focused on helping our scholars' work bridge the gap with different constituencies. So we have a government relations department, media relations department. We do direct outreach to various universities, working with students on campus, and I'll tell you about that towards the end of the presentation. Communication shop, the folks that run our blog and publish our books and the like. So all told, these numbers are off. We actually, since I produced this slide, we had another growth spurt, and we're about 202 full-time employees currently, which makes us one of the larger think tanks in town. Now, think tanks in general, let me segue a little bit in terms of talking about the other think tanks in town. You know, at one point, it was just Brookings and ourselves. There were two of us. You know, I think they were founded in the late 1920s, so they're always just a handful of years older than us. We don't seem to catch up as hard as we try. There's always that gap. But nowadays, there are well over 1,500 think tanks in the U.S. It's blossomed tremendously in the last 20, 30 years. All right? It actually doesn't take much in order to create a think tank. You can actually do it tonight at home if you wanted to. You go sit yourself up in front of a bookshelf, you take a photo of yourself thinking, you put it on the website, you give yourself a fancy acronym, apply for a 50c3, and lo and behold, you got yourself a think tank. All right? Vast majority of that 1,500 think tanks out there are small little mom and pop shops. Some of them could be, you know, a single professor at a college campus calling himself or his enterprise or her enterprise a think tank. It could be small little special interest groups that do the same. But of the big boys in town, there's really only about a dozen of us. All right? It's ourselves, it's Brookings, it's Hoover, Heritage, Cato, CSIS, Carnegie, Pew, Rand, Urban Institute. You can throw Mathematica in there too. There are not that many of the big premier name organizations. If you look at all those organizations, they really can be grouped into three major types or models. The traditional model, the classical model as I call it, is what ourselves and Brookings created over time. It's best described as just a university without students. It's like Maxwell without you. In that we have scholars, here they're called professors, who get to do independent research. They have the academic freedom to pick and choose what they want to work on. They have the academic freedom when it comes to expressing their own views as to their research findings. They use the same sort of academically rigorous methodologies. You notice I'm using the word academic a whole lot because a lot of our scholars are academics. All right? Some of them are practitioners, but a lot of them are academics. And again, they were, if you go back to those early days, they were influenced by the things that they liked on college campuses, and they said, hey, we're going to apply that to our little version of a kind of mini university where we don't focus so much on teaching as we focus on just producing scholarly research. Now, there are some differences between what goes on at AEI and what goes on here. All right? The obvious one is the lack of students. We don't confer degrees currently. It's actually in the works that in a few years from now you might be able to get an MPA from AEI, but we're not quite there yet. We need to get our building situated first, and then we'll tackle that one next. But right now it's a university without the students, right? Second important distinction is in terms of who our target audience is. In traditional academia, one is writing for one's peers. It's other professors are going to determine whether or not you make tenure. all right? It's the peer review process to determine how valuable your work is, all right? It's about getting published in the prestigious academic journals. Who reads those? Other academics, all right? And so it's very much, it tends to be a PhD to PhD dialogue. Whereas in the think tank world, we're writing for public policy decision makers. That means people in the government, the media, the general public, ourselves, our parents, anyone under the sun who has an interest in why the country's heading in one direction versus another, what the alternatives are, costs, benefits, pros, cons, all right? And trust me when I say there are a lot of people in the government that aren't all too bright, and a lot of them don't have advanced degrees in economics and the like. And so we have to produce stuff in such a way that it's consumable by the educated layperson. It means you got to write it so I get it, right? That my parents get it, that you all get it, but you're smarter enough to understand the PhD stuff. The third important distinction is that our work has to be relevant. We're producing work for public policy decision makers so they can make better informed decisions. It has to be useful to them. That is not necessarily the case in terms of what goes on at a lot of universities. As long as you're making a contribution in the overall field, you're filling in some little gap of knowledge, you can have a very successful career in traditional academia. The rest of the world might give a collective yawn in terms of the nature of your research, and certainly Washington might. But in the think tank world, we have to produce tangible materials that are actually helpful. Now, there are other models of think tanks out there. Perhaps the most prevalent, and I say perhaps only because I actually haven't counted, but it's my guess, is what I call a mission-based or an advocacy think tank. If I was to ask the average person on the street in terms of what a think tank does, I usually get some sort of answer involving, well, it's an organization that's pushing a particular policy agenda or wants to collectively accomplish something, right? And with mission-based organizations, that's absolutely the case. They're oftentimes organizations that are founded for the express purpose of representing one side of the argument, one side of the debate. Their job is, in essence, in order to start with the answer and work backwards in order to provide support for their particular answer, for their particular vision. So you look at an issue like abortion, all right? There are policy organizations, think tanks out there that are working on the pro-choice side or on the pro-life side. They're one or the other. So Family Research Council on one side, the equivalent of Planned Parenthood on the other. All right? You know exactly what the research results are going to be and what you're going to find on their website before you even log in. All right? It's not a surprise that Family Research Council comes out in terms of pro-life each and every time for every single study that they do on the issue. At AEI, we don't have a singular answer. We have scholars that work in the exact same discipline who have come up with polar opposite positions in terms of what their prescription is for policy around issues like stem cell research or organ markets, right? I've got Sally Sattel, who's very much for the creation of organ markets. We've got Leon Kass, world-famous bioethicist, very much against. We love putting them in the same room, a room like this. You slap on the proverbial boxing gloves. You let them go at it for 5 rounds. It's very entertaining. Sally's sprightly. She gives Leon a good 1-2 every once in a while. But the reality is that we're comfortable with discourse, debate, and at the end of the day, disagreement. We have a lot of scholars who work in overlapping areas who have polar opposite views in terms of what they see as the solution being. And we're comfortable with that. There isn't a unified front that we're trying to project. Leadership doesn't come in and say, hey, Arthur, you gotta write this because this is what AEI stands for, all right? There is no singular one issue where you can say AEI always stands for this. You'll never see it written where this is AEI's position on an issue. It's always the individual scholar, right? It works the same way here. Maxwell doesn't have a particular stance on any area of policy. It's up to the individual professors to make their own decisions, right? The last model of think tanks is the home of the contractual-based research organizations. These are the places like Urban Institute, RAND, Mathematica on the for-profit side. Think tanks where they make their living by doing research on behalf of outside entities. In Washington, that outside entity, 9 times out of 10, is the US government. There are billions of dollars out there where they don't have the in-house expertise to do a particular research project, so they farm it out. These organizations bid on the work. If they successfully win that bid, they're then contractually obligated to do that particular research project based on the parameters that the client has set. You don't move beyond those parameters based on the timetable, and they simply do the work, turn over the results, and then they move on to the next paying gig. Right? At AEI, our scholars are fully in charge of driving their own research agenda. We don't take a dime from the government. We don't do a single bit of contractual-based research. You can't hire one of our scholars in order to write a book on your behalf, to commission a particular study. They are free in order to, again, drive their own research agenda. So the question always comes up then, well, how does AEI fund itself? All right. We're a nonprofit. We live off of donations, and we actually fund ourselves the exact same way that Maxwell funds itself. It's off of donations. The big difference is we don't have tuition dollars driving it, but I'll tell you what, that tuition dollars are not what's paying for this building, all right? It's coming from a lot of different sources. And one of the biggest sources is gonna be you all down the road, all right? I guarantee you within 2 weeks of graduating, you're going to get that first phone call, all right? They might politely send you a note first and say, hey, would you update your contact information with us? And it's from the alumni office or the development office. And then they'll start asking you for those couple of dollars, all right? It's $5 at first, maybe 10 in a couple of years. You become successful, they'll add a 0 or 2 at the end of that. You become very successful. Heck, we'll name a building after you, all right? Or if you want to name a chair after yourself or a particular discipline that we want to expand upon, awesome. You're more than welcome in order to spend your money on that. We do it the exact same way, all right? There are people out there that are passionate about different policy issues, that are fans of our scholars' work, that see the value in terms of what a place like AEI can have in the Washington scene, and they're willing in order to fund it. They don't have the right in order to come in and as a result determine the scholar's research agenda. That's always one of those grand conspiracy theories I always read about. It's, the moment that Norm Ornstein recently wrote a book in terms of why the Republican Party is the root of all evil, AEI is going to lose all of its funding as a result of that. No. We've got a couple people that say, hey, awesome book, Norm. Hope you can continue to do stuff like that. Good job, all right? And we're happy with that, all right? So, now, all 3 models, the classical, the mission-based, the contractual, there isn't one that's inherently superior to the other. They're all different. They all have their own unique place within the Washington Sea, right? You want the government in order to get answers to questions, specific questions that they're willing in order to spend research dollars on procuring, right? There's a place for that. Mission-based organizations, no matter what your personal politics are, you want organizations out there that see the world the way that you see it and are pushing things in that particular direction, and you fully recognize that it's a free country. We got this thing called freedom of speech, and as a result, there are probably organizations out there that are counting your side, and that's fine, all right? That's the way that the game is played. And then certainly places like AEI, Brookings, we get to stay a little bit above the politics in the town and focus more on policy. We get turned to a lot by both sides of the aisle for interesting ideas. We did a study on this recently just to see what the numbers are. And it's quite startling, actually, that in looking at all think tanks out there, AEI, and I'll be off by a couple %, but of the number of times that our scholars are cited and sourced in the 3 most important newspapers in the country, in the U.S. Do you want to guess what they are when it comes to policy? What? Did I hear Washington Post? All right, yes, that's one. New York Times, yep. 3rd one? Got it, all right. So if you look at the number of times that our scholars are cited and sourced, we actually have 43% of all think tank citations. That's a huge number. All right, the next nearest 5 organizations don't quite equal what we produce. All right, our scholars more than double the next nearest think tank in terms of the number of times they are asked to testify in front of Congress. All right, that means that. What I should be careful about this. It doesn't necessarily mean that our scholars are right. All right, it just means that they are seen as people who have something interesting in order to contribute when it comes to understanding some very complex issues. And they're drawn upon as subject matter experts. And that's simply what we, again, provide is that sort of service, that sort of resource to the general public, to the government. We give our stuff away for free, all right? And so, you know, again, the focus is definitely on policy and not so much politics. Even though, obviously, D.C. is a very political town, there is an important distinction between the two. Now, this is about the time where I show my cheesy little video. I have to warn you. The video is a little bit out of date when, oops. Here we go. The wonders of technology. Before I hit play, the video is a little bit out of date when it comes to the numbers. So you're going to see a bunch of numbers that are splashed up on the screen. One of it includes something like that. We had 40 scholars at the time that we produced it, and now it's up to 70. And we had 140 employees, and now we're officially at 202. So we've had a little bit of growth over the last handful of years since we've produced this. That's a sign, obviously, that the organization is financially it's strong, and we've been doing well. So ignore that, but otherwise it gives you a feel, and it will feature a former professor that taught here. So I don't know if you've been around, how long you've been around, but Arthur Brooks is obviously our president now, and he taught here for a number of years. So there's a pretty good SU connection as well. We talk basketball all the time.
The American Enterprise Institute is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C. We're based on 3 basic principles: maximizing liberty, increasing individual opportunity, and strengthening the free enterprise system.
We believe in free enterprise and free markets and the efficiency of markets. We also believe that the best research comes from collaborative teams of scholars and research assistants and interns doing what they think is right.
The thing I like about the scholars at AEI is that they do a wide variety of different work, and some of them are world-renowned as being scholars who have innovative ideas. Charles Murray would be a good example in that regard. But I think the work that I'm most impressed by is where people have identified a problem and worked on it for decades, and even when they make themselves incredibly unpopular, they have continued to push when other people don't want them to talk about it.
It's a little bit like being drafted by the New York Yankees. You go into the locker room, and all through the clubhouse, you see people who would be all-stars on another team, and these are just the folks you say hi to in the hallway.
AEI is a community of 55 full-time scholars and 130 staff. We have a total of 800 donors all around the country and around the world. In other words, although AEI is a pretty famous place and has a lot of impact on public policy, it's a small group of people. And that means that everybody who's involved, the interns, the research assistants, the scholars, and the staff, they're all pitching in for something that's truly important, and their work matters. Research assistants, or RAs, are the backbone of what AEI does. Embedded in everything we do are the research assistants that are part and parcel of all of our research projects.
The RAs here are not just staff assistants, they're not just folks who answer the phone. They are an integral part of the scholarship that we put out. I think that most of our research assistants are really junior scholars. They're people who are working closely with the relevant people. Everybody's door is open, everybody is accessible to them, and it is a really big learning experience for them.
I've got a terrific staff of 4 folks who are recent graduates, and it's remarkable. You know, they're here full time, so I get to work real closely with them. I get to co-author with them. I get to put them in charge of important conferences.
One of the great things about being a young person at AEI is if you're not sure whether you're inclined toward the research aspect or the nonprofit management aspect or the business or fundraising aspects, they give you a lot of opportunities to kind of develop your skills in other areas.
I've been very fortunate to work with scholars who have not only been very willing to pass along their knowledge, but they've been very willing to help me out in my own research and my own freelance work.
In addition to our research assistants, AEI has interns, about 40 of them every semester. Our interns are involved in all the different parts of the operation of the Institute. AEI's interns integrate with the staff in fundraising and conferences, in events, in communications, but they're also part of the research product. We have interns that are assigned to different scholars that are interested in foreign policy, in economics, in social policy, politics, education, and healthcare. The interns are as vital as the research assistants in helping us understand how we can make our product better and more relevant, especially to a new generation of Americans.
The scholars like to joke that there are none of us that would ever, be hired as an intern at AEI because none of us had an academic record that's as good as the typical intern.
I would say the standard of the interns and the research assistants at AEI is higher than anywhere else I've ever worked, including Cambridge University in England. I would say that the standard is literally outstanding.
I was lucky enough to land an internship here with Newt Gingrich, and it was really a thrill. It was almost kind of an honor to have that much responsibility entrusted to me as an intern. It was really a great experience.
We're a community. Our doors are open, our scholars work together, our research assistants work together. We really are almost a family, and it is socially and intellectually a really important thing to have that kind of community. It makes our product just all that much better.
After being an intern, I knew it was a place I wanted to work.
The hard thing about working with RAs simply is seeing them go on to new and great things, which they inevitably do. Our RAs have incredible trajectories of success. Many of them write back to us and say that if it hadn't been for their experience at AEI, they wouldn't have been able to do the things that they do. But one of the things that I know as the president of AEI is that if it weren't for the RAs, we couldn't do what we do.
The network that I've developed here, the friendships and relationships that I've built here will serve me well in the years ahead, and that's one of the things that I value most about my time here at AEI.
Sort of cheesy, as I said. It's the music is what gets me. I'm kind of grooving out the entire time. All right, let's go back to this thing. So what does this mean? Who wants to know about job employment opportunities, right? That's what we're all here for at the end of the day. Depending on what someone's interests are, one's either going to be coming in the business side of the organization or on the academic side. If I'm talking to folks at college, everyone wants to know about the academic side. You're professional students at this point. That's what you've been doing your entire lives. Well, it just seems natural in order to try to find a job where you get to continue to do what you've liked doing for the past 20 years. And lo and behold, we offer that. For the way we're structured on the academic side, it's a very flat organization in that we have our scholars, and then we have the 30, 35 or so young folks whose job it is in order to support the work of our scholars. We call them research assistants for short. Some departments or some units have, call them research analysts or whatever the case may be. But basically, the work there is pretty standard, whether you're working on the econ, foreign policy, or the domestic policy side of things. And that there are 4 key functions to the job. The obvious one is, and the no-brainer, is obviously assisting with the research, right? It's everything from read these 3 books, produce a lit review for me, who said this in this particular year. On the econ side, it's an awful lot of running regressions and economic modeling work. It's very quantitative focused there. Foreign policy tends to be a little bit more qualitative. Something blows up in the world and people want to talk about it and figure out what we ought to do. And we instantly have to put together an event and a panel discussion in order to talk about these things. And so that kind of leads into a little bit of the writing and editing and the conference planning. The writing and editing is also pretty straightforward. I mean, ultimately, while we're producing research, we have to get it into the written word. And so our young folks help write the stuff, they edit the stuff, they sometimes co-author. We're always tickled pink when people have the opportunity in order to do that. It's nothing that I could ever promise coming through the door, that people will have the opportunity to co-author a book or write your own op-ed piece that will get published in the New York Times. But people have done it, and if they've dedicated themselves to it, they've got the innate ability. The better your writing skills are, we'll find creative and helpful ways in order to make use of them. All right? The conference planning side of stuff is part of the rest of what we do, and that obviously we write. We produce white papers and books and academic journal articles and op-ed pieces and all that sort of stuff, but we talk a lot too. If you spend more than 10 minutes on C-SPAN on any given evening, odds are you're going to stumble eventually across one of our events. Now, it might be our way of curing insomnia, but more often than not, on a daily basis, we probably have at least one event on one of those types of networks. All right? We have 400 events each year at AEI. We've only got 3 floors, the top floors of the building, but practically on every single day, we've got something going on. It could be a huge multi-day, multi-person panel. Last week we had the Dalai Lama there for 2 days talking about human flourishing and free enterprise, and that took a year to pull together. All right, between flying over there and meeting with folks and all the sort of arrangements that need to be made, from State Department to figuring out diplomatic security to the whole 9 yards. It took a cast of thousands in order to pull that one off. And we did, and it was largely our young folks were the ones that were responsible for managing all the logistics and the marketing and the financing and the whole 9 yards. They also could be small little breakfast meetings. Could pull a couple of members of Congress or key cabinet people off the Hill and sit around and have a kind of an informal discussion, brainstorming session about different issues. And those might not be open to the public. And everything in between. And so there's an awful lot of work that goes into obviously prepping for those in terms of the research that goes into what you're going to discuss and disseminate, writing up the results and marketing those if there are any learning points that we want to broadcast out there. And then the last piece is the administrative side. And I don't want to hide this from people. It's part of the reality of getting your foot in the door in the policy world. Is that until you have been the leader of the free world or former ambassador to the United Nations or someplace warm outside of Syracuse, you're going to end up being the one who's going to be handling the media queries and the travel arrangements and things of that nature. We don't have secretaries, but it's just to generally assume that our young folks are going to end up doing that end of the work as well. All right. It's not the largest portion. It's a small piece, but it is a piece. Now, we do have opportunities on the business side as well. Every year, we offer positions. I just call them staff assistants, but it's basically people who work at different levels within conferences, development, communications, gov, media, and so on and so on. There's always going to be entry-level positions for people who have an interest in working in the public policy arena, but aren't necessarily so enamored with doing the day-to-day policy research. There's a cast of about 70, 75 people that their job it is in order to add value to the Institute. All right? So when do we have these job openings? We start advertising them now, to be honest with you. The vast majority of my turnover occurs in the summer. It's people who are going back to either PhD programs if they don't have a BA or an MA, particularly on the econ side of stuff. Or it could be people that are then, after a couple of years, using AEI as a springboard in order to get significantly higher positions outside of the Institute. CIA picks off our folks regularly for more senior level analyst positions. We have good relationships with a number of members of Congress, particularly on the Foreign policy committee positions where both Lieberman and McCain. Lieberman obviously is retired, but he was very famous for just calling up Danny every time he had a vacancy and said, "Send me your best person." And we got to place a committee position. People in Washington are willing to lop off limbs in order to have those opportunities. And us having the opportunity in order to present someone and basically filling that slot for a member of Congress is awesome. All right. And it's largely because they trust us and they know us by reputation, that we've got such high standards when it comes to the people that we let in the door, but also just the training and the responsibilities that develop talent in-house, that they come prepared for those more senior level positions. And we're very proud of the fact that we invest heavily in our young folks in order to help them make that next jump. Right. DC is a very small town. Its population of whatever, it's like 600,000 people. Greater DC metropolitan area is a couple million. And while there's a lot of government drones out there in the policy world, there's actually a very small number of individuals that are players in any one particular discipline. It's a lot like the NFL. You know who the all-star quarterbacks are. You know who the wide receivers are, and they might be in different organizations, and they may be spread throughout town and sometimes outside of D.C. But they all know each other. And so having the opportunity in order to network within that particular community, within that environment, allows one in order to absolutely further one's career. It's not... I don't know if it's fair or not. I really practically don't care. But the reality is, DC's not just what you know. It's very much who you know, and that's just a reality of the way that the city works, and has always worked. It works that way everywhere. And so, when you get to be in the center of it all and develop that reputation, you do get to further your careers pretty drastically as a result. If you prove your worth, right? Now. We start having vacancies pop up now. That is, people start telling me that they're planning on leaving so that we can start assisting them with that process. We help them get interviews. We help them make that next jump. So it's very rare that someone just does the standard 2 weeks notice and then they scoot out of there. And that allows me in order to start recruiting for people in order to fill some of these vacancies in advance of people graduating. All right. On one of those white sheets, there is a generic description in terms of what a research assistant is. I've got that position posted on my website as a general holding bucket, but on the back of that is the actual specific jobs that I already know that I'm looking for people. All right? I will be looking for a total of, I think, 4 people in our critical threats project by the time that the summer's through. I already got 2 vacancies that I know of, and I think I'll have another 2. I know I need at least a couple more people to research analysts to work on the econ side of things. There we're looking for people who can run regressions, who've done well in econometrics, have taken linear, multivariable, and excelled in that, because those are the tools that you need in order to do the work. And then we have some vacancies that are going to pop up in various business units as well. Between now and May, between now and June even, I'll probably have another half a dozen or so positions pop up that I'll put on the website. Now we automatically post them out here. Our system, I think, automatically sends it out so that it shows up at your AU's consolidated with the Career Center, right? I know each school has its own, but I think the database is centralized, right?
So, no, it's not.
Yeah. Okay.
We have our own.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Positions are posted.
They are both good. Okay. Yeah, and I know we're undergraduate coverage as well, and so every school is a little bit different, and I know that we've figured out how to do it using technology. So good, we got it covered. Excellent. No egg on the face today. All right. So the process itself, it all starts online. It's submitting your resume, cover letter, transcripts, writing sample. I don't need official transcripts. Please don't pay for them. Cut and paste it off of the register site. Write it out on crayon and take a photo. Could care less. I just want to know what classes you took and how well you did. All right. So don't send SU any additional money if you don't have to. All right. And then And then it's a little bit of a waiting process in that we get a lot of people applying for the jobs. It takes us a while in order to get through the various applications. For folks that are selected for interviews, if you're not in town, we will do initially either 1 or 2 phone interviews. One will definitely be HR. The second one would probably be the academic unit that someone would be coming into. And if those go well, at that point, we'll fly people down, put them up for a night at a hotel, Schwank Hotel in DC, and then subject them to what I affectionately call the gauntlet. And the gauntlet is basically, it's an all-day interview process where you're going to meet everyone that's important within the department, outside of the department, other research assistants, other scholars, all in the hopes that at the end of the day, we've had the chance to do our due diligence, and a candidate absolutely has their chance to do that as well, all right? And then we'll see if we can come to terms. Right? If someone's local in DC, we spread that out over 3 days. So it's 3 separate steps. It's an HR interview one day. If people do well there, department the next time around. And then if people come do well there, they come back, spend time with myself and one of the other executives in order to cross the T's, dot the I's before we hire. All right? So that's jobs. All right? Internship opportunities. While I will probably have about a dozen or so jobs to fill, the board says 65. This summer I'm going to have 72 interns. Nicholas, you got into this last summer, so you can certainly talk about it in a second. Our internship process our internship program is incredibly robust. You know, a lot of interns, you come in, you're expected basically in order to fetch coffee and get the dry cleaning and make photocopies. At a place like AEI, we ask you in order to do the one thing that we know you're good at, and that's research. There's a running joke in the office that our interns actually get to do more research than our research assistants do, in large part because we don't saddle our interns with the additional administrative work that the RAs take time to learn. It takes a while to learn how to schedule a conference, and it might take 6 months to pull it all together. Well, you're not going to be there, for a 6-month-long internship. You might only be there for, a semester, a couple of months over the course of the summer. And so we focus on the substantive part of the organization. It is a program where we try to add as much value as we can and certainly go above and beyond in that we have weekly discussion groups. We host a lecture series each week where different department heads, different scholars come in and talk to kind of a small, informal discussion groups with our interns about their own research. It gives people exposure to areas that they otherwise might not have day-to-day exposure to. So if you're in the foreign policy shop, guarantee you'll at least have a chance to talk to some of the economists that way and vice versa. We do some additional activities. I know we scheduled tours, it's on there. And typically we'll do like Pentagon, State Departments, Congress. So for people who haven't done the touristy stuff in DC, it's an opportunity in order to see how the government works, or in some cases doesn't work. Depending on the semester, we've had special arrangements with key members of Congress and even Supreme Court justices where they've guided our interns through private tours. It's kind of neat to go through the Supreme Court and have a Supreme Court justice actually be the one who's showing you the back hallways. It's, again, nothing I can guarantee. It's been a couple of years since we've done it last, but they pop up every so often. We even have a formal intern dinner to kind of celebrate our interns. Now, one of the things that people always ask is, are internships paid? And the answer is no. No, 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 no. Most internships are not paid in DC, particularly with the big policy organizations. Quite frankly, we don't have to. And we add enough value to it that I think we can kind of get away with it. That being said, we feed you. We actually, we're well known within Washington for serving one of the best lunches around. We have a gourmet chef. We have a new gourmet chef who was the head chef that Hyatt used to send down every time that they opened up a schwank new resort, and would set up their food operations for 5-star restaurants. The guy knows what he's doing. And so I have everything. I had Scottish quail last week. Apparently there's a 2-week season where you can get access to Scottish quail, and we had it. It's the equivalent of going to like Morton's every day for lunch, but a little bit more exotic. We charge our staff $5. Our interns eat for free. There's breakfast as well, continental affair, and so you will not go hungry while at AEI. Right around 2 o'clock, cookies get delivered to each floor's kitchen. For the health conscious, we do carrots and celery sticks too, but the cookies are where they're at. And so we do keep you well caffeinated, well sugared, well fed. We figure you think better that way, and it makes a good overall experience. Nicholas, can you think of anything else you want to add about the program?
Just to emphasize the point, it's really a two-way process with the scholars. They, like Michael, whom I worked with, invested time in my research, and I invested time in his research. He really helped me to get blog posts posted. I did a study that was published in the end, and it's really like everybody's door is open, and I could not only thrive in my field, but also explore issues I did not formally have any knowledge about, like with really impressive scholars, and that really opened up new thoughts for me.
Yeah. Good. No, it's a competitive program. It's hard to get into our program, particularly come summertime. I'll give you a little insider's tip. We have 70 slots. You want to guess how many internship applications we're going to get for those 70 slots for the summer? And you can't answer this. You know the answer. Ballpark? 2,300. We're going to get about 3,000 applications for those 70 slots. It's about a 2% acceptance rate. All right. It means that you got to submit, if you're interested, your materials early. One of the brochures that I gave you gives an April 1 deadline, but the reality is we do it on a rolling basis. All right? And whether you're a grad student, an undergrad, someone who's recently graduated, we take them all. All right, the more experience, the better. It's better for us. Quite honestly, we prefer recent graduates in large part because if they're phenomenal, we can hire them on the spot. We don't have to wait another year or two before they graduate. All right, you have the opportunity in order to apply for each and any one of those internships, but you got to do it as individual, right? It's one application per internship. And we set it up that way because I always encourage people to write those very targeted cover letters. Do your due diligence, research the scholar that you want to work with and what they're all about. When you submit writing samples, make sure it's a targeted writing sample. There's nothing in, I use this as a cartoony example, but if we worked on gun control and we happened to have a scholar who was very for guns, there's nothing worse than sending a writing sample that makes the argument for the opposite side, because the scholar's immediately going to say is, well, why does this guy want to work for me? He's working against me, right? Makes no sense. So just make sure you spent the time and actually do a little bit of research. And then write those very targeted cover letters. The generic cover letters would basically say, hey, I'm really interested in working with Professor X, but if he's not available, Professor Y would be an okay second choice. Well, I can't give that letter to Professor Y. He's going to go, I don't want to be second choice for anyone. All right, screw that. So just be smart about it, all right? Submit the stuff soon, real soon. I'm talking about this weekend and next at the latest, because since we start closing positions on a rolling basis, by the time April 1 will roll around, we will probably have maybe 80%, 90% of the positions already filled, all right? There's a page that's in the material packet that describes each and every internship that we offer. It tells you who the scholar is. It tells you what the requirements are if there are specific skill sets that we're looking for. In some cases, it might be just simply demonstrated interest. They've taken coursework in this particular area. In others, it might be language abilities. The foreign policy shop in particular tends to be very regional focused and requires oftentimes some language expertise in that particular region. You know, for those critical threats vacancies that I have, you know, I'm always looking for people who have good knowledge of Arabic or Farsi. Urdu is helpful too, because we want people to be able to do research using open source materials. And obviously that requires a little bit of translation when you're talking about government papers coming from that region. Right? The process itself, all done online. It's a very similar URL. It's again the same materials that we need, and we do offer, by the way, the same internship opportunities both spring and fall. It's a lot. We don't get anywhere near the 3,000 applications as we do in the summer during the spring or fall. It's a little bit easier in order to make it in during that period of time, or sometimes during those bridge months. So that might be the late July, August, September type of thing, or over the holidays, the winter holidays. And we've worked all sorts of different deals. There's no set end date or start date. We just kind of work around people's schedules. Now, there is one last thing that we've started, and that's AEI campus programs. There's a lot of interest in terms of expanding our readership, quite frankly, getting young people like yourselves exposed to the think tank world earlier in your career. All right, not just focused on book learning and stuff that you're learning on campus, but actually be talking to people who are in DC. And so we've come up with a program which allows us to bring AEI to your campus. We started with a small number of schools last year. We were expanding those. I think Syracuse is in the next wave, where we hire what we call an executive council, so kind of volunteers on campus in order to help drive this, and do lead discussion groups. We bring scholars to campus in order to lead those. So, it's pretty common for Charles Murray or Michael Lubin or others in order to come in order to talk about their research or other areas of policy work, and kind of sit down one-on-one with students. We also have a summer school. It's different than our internship program. Our internship program is our professional opportunities. All right? Our summer school are academic opportunities, where for a 2-week period of time in June or July, I forget what month, we actually bring students in. We pay a stipend for this. We pay for housing. Fly young folks in order to study a couple of weeks with us, and we put you through the paces from everything from econ, foreign policy, applied research tools, the whole 9 yards. And it's a really neat opportunity in order to kind of get a boot camp introduction to the real world of DC-based public policy. That application process is again described on that colorful brochure. It's a separate process. It actually uses a very different, I think they're still old school there. I think people are either emailing in or faxing in their materials, but people have a chance in order to submit and compete for that too. Now, I covered a lot of ground. I'm hitting the hour mark, so I gotta stop talking and shut up for a while and answer questions that you might guys have. What do you want to know that I didn't cover? Yeah?
For your research assistants, can you give us a little bit more background on the sort of average accepted CV? You kept on kind of referring to them as our young folk, which I'm assuming is just in reference to it's not
everyone's younger than me. That's right. That's right.
But sort of what's the average age? Are they usually MAs? Because I saw in the video it said something that 100% of the people who leave go to master's programs.
Yep. It's so on the econ and the domestic policy front. I would say probably somewhere to 90% of the people coming in the door just have BAs, right? Because an MA is not necessary in order to do the job. In the foreign policy, it's about 50-50. and are coming in with their MAs. Now, I think the video talks about getting the next step graduate degrees. For econ, you got to go off and get your PhD in economics if you want to be an economist in the world of public policy, all right? And so we launch a lot of people into those schools. We also launch people into MBA programs and on the occasional MPP and MPA if they want to become practitioners. A few law degrees as well. I think we had 4 people go to law school out of last year's program, with all of them to Harvard. So I try to talk people out of going to law school, but if you're going to go, you might as well go there. And 3 out of the 4 got fully funded, which is another feather in our cap, all right, for law school, all right? Yeah, I mean, we try to work with folks there. Now, the reality is on the academic side, it is, again, very flat. It's our interns, our research assistants, associates, and then our scholars. And it's very difficult to bridge that gap from being an RA to becoming a full-time scholar. It's happened a few times over the years. Just someone who's just was so gifted and had the ability, they were cranking out, they were putting in the hours. I mean, they were doing all their assigned work, and then on top of that, they were there on the weekends and writing their own stuff and really working on it and getting it published. And they were passionate about it. It wasn't a job for them. It was, you know, if you're doing what you love, it's not a job, all right? We created kind of that third tier, so not a full-time scholar, because most of those guys and gals are you know, people who've had decades of real-life experience in the world of public policy, and you know, leader of the free world type of thing, right? But we do help people kind of bridge that gap. Now, on the business side, it's a little bit different. And there we have many, many more levels within the organization. And so people coming in with graduate degrees might be coming in order to help, you know, run our government relations shop if we have the right vacancy, or you know, media relations, depending on what their background is, right? You know, for all those business functions, we're looking for people who have the subject matter expertise and are able to use that subject matter expertise in order to help promote our scholars' work, right? It's the rare bird that can go on the hill and actually explain what 70 individual scholars are actually up to, all right? And so hopefully I answered your question, yeah.
On average, how long are RAs there for?
It's typically 2 to 3 years. We ask for a minimum of 2 years. A year isn't long enough for us in order to be able to help launch them into that next step, and the investment just isn't worth it for us. It takes roughly about a year's time just in order to get familiar with what a scholar's been working on for a lifetime. And then that allows us in the second year in order to kind of start setting them up for the next step of whatever their career path might be. Other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned when you were explaining the internship process that targeted cover letters are absolutely imperative.
Mm-hmm.
Are they quite as targeted for research assistant positions? I mean, I'm thinking like, economic policy research assistant. It's like,
yeah,
I want to be the RA for this guy, or is
well, here's the reality with you're still going to write a targeted letter. We don't tell you when we post a research position who the scholar or scholars are going to be, all right? If you saw the numbers, we had 70-ish full-time scholars, 30 or so research assistants. That's not even a 2-to-1 ratio. Most of our RAs are working for more than one person. An individual scholar might just not produce enough research needs in order to warrant have someone do 20 hours worth of work and then twiddle their thumbs for the rest of the week, all right? So we pair people up within a particular department. There are a couple of exceptions to that rule. There's actually 2 scholars, Fred Kagan and Rick Hess, who have small standing armies, just because their work is so robust and they're producing so much. So on average, the typical RRA is supporting somewhere between 2 to 3 scholars. Now, interns, it tends to be one-on-one. What I try to avoid are the people who think that they're going to be successful by sending their materials directly to a scholar. And if a typical application pool, depending on what we post, we might get 800 or 900 applications. If 800 or 900 emails were sent to that individual scholar, he'd be pissed. And he's not reading them at this point, all right? He's obligated to forward it to me in order to make sure that they're in the system and they're processed, and it just makes it a lot of extra work, and it's not providing anyone any sort of advantage by doing that, to kind of go around the system. But I, as a general philosophy, always want to hire someone who wants to be at AEI because we're AEI, as opposed to we just happen to have a vacancy in your field and you're applying just for a generic job. All right, so there are a lot of generic jobs out there. There's only one AEI, and so we do look for people who who are basically long-lost family members. We just didn't know you existed yet, and we want to welcome you into the fold, and you have something positive to contribute in a particular discipline. Right? Is that it? Yeah?
Is our institute in DC?
Yeah, everything's in DC. Yeah, except for obviously the on-campus stuff. We got one location. Nice thing is we actually have a new building that we're in the process of renovating. So, but that won't be ready until 2015. So, guys, thank you for hosting me. I very much appreciated your undivided attention, and I'm glad that I didn't hopefully bore you too much.